are now going to look at the contents contained within each and every uh, object within an MP4 file, and we also going to explain what that content means within an MP4 file and how you can actually make best use of them. Does that make sense? So the first object that we are going to look at, it's the Ftype object. The Ftype object, we said it should appear at the beginning of your file. Now, it has information that relates to the specifications that were used to create that MP4 file. It has information such as the minor version of that specification and other compatible specification to that file. So there are basically three things that you are going to find within this type of an object. And the first thing that you're going to get here, it's the major brand. The major brand specifies or will tell you the specification to which this file complies. And we also have the minor version, which is basically the minor version of the major brand to which this file complies. And you'll also have compatible brands. Here is the list of specifications to which this file complies, compatible brands. Here is the list of specifications that can make use of this file. So on major brand, you will have a 4-character name which will be identifying the specification to which this file complies. You have something like ISOM within the major brand, and on the version, it's just an integer that identifies the version of that specification, because this specification can come in different versions. Compatible brands, it's basically the list of specification that can be able to make use of the current file. So on compatible brands, you're going to have a list of things like ISOM, AVC1, I think, and Mp4 and many other specification. And some of these specifications, they come in different versions. For example, the ISOM come in different versions. There's ISO1, there's ISO2, depending on the number of versions of that specification. So the major brand will give you one of these, which is basically the specification to which this file can be best used. Does that make sense? So if you receive an MP4 file, if you create a player and a player that is able to play an MP4 file, you will be implementing a specification. You'll be implementing one of these specifications. You'll be looking at these specification on how to decode or how to work with that MP4 file, how the data is structured or is placed within that MP4 file. We'll be looking at this specification. Does that make sense? Even when the file is also created, you also look at this specification on how you should structure and place content within that MP4 file. Does that make sense? So here on the major brand, within this type of object, you're going to put the major brand. That means when you create this file, you're going to put the major brand. Okay, as I am creating this MP4 file, I am looking at this specification. Does that make sense? As I am creating this player, I am looking at that specification. So if you are playing a file, you are receiving a file, your player receives a file that was created looking at the same specification as you are creating this player, then you will be able to make use of that file because you will be looking at the same specification. You may also be able to make use of that file if you are looking at the specification that is compatible with the specification of with the specification to which the file you are receiving is is compatible with. Does that make sense? So if maybe let's say you are looking, when you are creating your player, you are looking at AVC, you are looking at this specification, and AVC also appears to be one of the compatible brands of this file that you are receiving. So that means you may be able to make use of that file, but that's not guaranteed. You may be able to make use of that file. But if you are looking at it, if the major brand of the file that you are receiving is IOSM, and you are also creating your player looking at the IOSM, then you are ensured that you will be able to make use of that file. So I said the specification may come in different versions, and I made an example with ISO 1, ISO 2, ISO 2. So there may be compatibility issues between the versions of a specification. There may be changes between the versions of a specification, and those changes may cause issues in terms of making use of the files that were created using those specifications. For example, there may be issues, you may have issues to work with a file that was created with ISO 1 when your player is actually looking at ISO 2. Does that make sense? Have you ever run into an issue with Windows Media Player, where when you try to open a file, you get a message box that will say, this file, Media Player may have an issue to playing this file. It's because Media Player have implemented a different version of the specification that was used to create the file that you're trying to open. Does that make sense? So Windows Media Player now is not sure if it's going to run into issues or it's not going to run into issues, but it can identify that, okay, the file was created with this version of this specification, and we're actually implementing, or we are looking at a different version than this one. So now, depending on the changes between these two versions of the same specification that we are looking at, we may run into problems when we are trying to decode that file. Does that make sense? So, but all those things are not important for this. I was just saying them so that you get an understanding of the purpose and the role that is played by this specification. Does that make sense? So here, what we are looking at, it's basically how to actually read and get out these type of information. Does that make sense? So within this Ftype, we say you get these type of information: the major brand, the minor version, and compatible brands. So let's look at how this data is placed within this object. So within this object, you're gonna have an array of bytes. You have this object. This is an Ftype. The first 4 bytes within this object, the first 4 bytes will give you the size of this object, including the 4 byte that contains the size. And then the second 4 byte within this object will give you the name of this object, yeah, which will be Ftype. It's 4 characters. Ftype. You're gonna have to convert each byte within this 4 byte into an ASCII character, and if you put them together, you're going to get Ftype. And then the third one, it's the following 1 byte will give you the version of this object. Does that make sense? And the following 3 byte will give you the flags. Does that make sense? And then the following bytes, depending, okay, the following 4 bytes will give you the major brand. It's the major brand. Does that make sense? So you will also convert each byte within this 4 byte and convert it into an ASCII character and put them together. You'll get ISOM if the major brand is ISM, AVC1 if the major brand is AVC1. And then the following bytes, the following 4 bytes would be the minor version of that major brand, the minor version of your major brand. And then the following bytes now would be an array of 4-byte integers that will be identifying the compatible brands depending on the number of compatible brands there. So you're going to have more bytes. For example, if AVC is one of the compatible brands, the 4 bytes will be AVC, and then you have another 4 byte here, and you will have, let's say, ISO 1, you'll have Mp4 you will have etc, etc. But you will divide the remaining after you have read after you read the major version. In order to get these compatible brands, you're going to have to divide whatever remaining bytes by 4. Then the number will tell you the number of compatible brands. Then you'll read 4 bytes, 4 bytes, 4 bytes, and convert them into characters to get the list of compatible brands. So this is how data is basically placed and structured within the F type.